Here's the introduction. Randonautica. A simple app that promises adventures and explorations based on randomly generated coordinates. For some, it's just a fun pastime, a way to discover new places. For others, it's the beginning of experiences that defy any rational explanation. Today, I bring you stories of people who decided to try Randonautica and ended up encountering things they could never have imagined. Things that challenge logic, scenes straight out of horror movies, and moments where the unknown felt more real than ever. These stories aren't just about creepy locations or strange coincidences. They're about how a simple digital map can lead you into situations that will haunt you forever. Whether you're a skeptic or just curious, get ready to dive into accounts that reveal the darker and more unexplainable side of this app. Starting with the first story. My name is William, and I've always been curious about the mysterious and unexplained. So, when my friends introduced me to the Randonautica app, I was intrigued. They told me stories of people finding strange, even creepy things, and I wanted to experience it for myself. Little did I know, I'd soon regret that decision. It was a cold, clear night in early November when we decided to try it out. There were 4 of us, me, my best friend Jake, and 2 others, Sarah and Emily. We piled into my car, ready for an adventure. Before generating our first location, we collectively set an intention, something mysterious. The app worked quickly, spitting out a set of coordinates just 10 minutes away. The spot was near an old, wooded area on the edge of town, somewhere none of us had been before. Excited but slightly nervous, we followed the directions until we reached a narrow dirt road. I parked the car at the edge of the woods, and we stepped out into the cold night air. Flashlights in hand, we followed the app's map, which pointed us deeper into the forest. The trees were tall and bare, their branches clawing at the night sky. The only sounds were the crunch of leaves beneath our feet and the occasional rustle of the wind. After about 10 minutes of walking, Sarah suddenly stopped. "Do you hear that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. We all paused, listening intently. At first, there was nothing, just the stillness of the forest. But then we heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping sound. It was coming from ahead, exactly where the app was leading us. Jake laughed nervously. "Probably just a branch hitting something," he said, but even he didn't sound convinced. We pressed on, our curiosity outweighing our fear. As we got closer, the tapping grew louder, and the air seemed to grow colder. Finally, we reached the coordinates, a small clearing surrounded by dense trees. In the middle of the clearing was an old, rusted metal drum. It looked completely out of place, like it had been dragged there from a construction site. The tapping sound had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that made my skin crawl. Jake, ever the brave one, approached the drum and shone his flashlight inside. "There's something in here," he muttered, his voice shaking. Emily and I moved closer, our flashlights joining his. Inside the drum were scraps of torn fabric, what looked like a broken doll, and something that made my stomach turn, a small, blood-stained glove. "What the hell is this?" Sarah whispered, stepping back. Before any of us could answer, we heard it again, the tapping. But this time, it wasn't faint. It was loud and coming from the trees surrounding us. Our flashlights darted around, but we couldn't see anything. The sound was all around us, echoing through the woods. Then, in the corner of my eye, I saw movement, a shadow darting between the trees. "Run!" Jake shouted, and we didn't need to be told twice. We bolted back the way we came, the tapping now turning into loud, deliberate knocks that seemed to follow us. When we finally reached the car, we jumped in and sped off, not saying a word until we were safely back in town. Later that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the drum and the glove. I tried looking up missing person cases in the area but found nothing concrete. The experience left us shaken, and none of us have used Randonautica since. Sometimes, I wonder what would have happened if we had stayed a moment longer in that clearing. But deep down, I'm glad we didn't. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Second story. My name is Jason, and this happened about a year ago. My friends George, Cameron, and I were hanging out after a party. It was one of those nights where you don't really want to go home yet, but you're not sure what to do next. George, always the one with the weird ideas, suggested we try Randonautica. At first, Cameron and I were hesitant. We'd heard the stories, people finding creepy things or ending up in sketchy places. But George was persistent, saying it'd be fun and that we'd probably just end up in some random field or parking lot. It was already past 2 a.m., and the streets were dead quiet. Against our better judgment, we agreed. We set our intention as something exciting, and the app gave us coordinates about 15 minutes away. The location was on the outskirts of town, down a winding, poorly lit road. As we drove, the excitement started to build, but so did a strange tension. We eventually pulled up to a dead-end street surrounded by trees. The GPS told us to walk the rest of the way. The three of us grabbed our flashlights and started down a narrow dirt path that cut through the woods. The air was cold and still, and the only sound was the crunch of leaves beneath our feet. After about 10 minutes, we reached the coordinates. The app showed that we were in the exact spot, but there was nothing. Just trees and darkness. "This is it?" Cameron asked, annoyed. George shrugged. "I guess so. Maybe we missed something." We spread out a bit, scanning the area with our flashlights. The longer we stayed there, the more uneasy I felt. The woods were too quiet, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. "Guys," George called out, his voice low. "Do you feel that?" "Feel what?" Cameron asked. "The air, it's colder now," George replied, looking around nervously. He was right. The temperature seemed to have dropped suddenly, and the silence was deafening. Then we heard it, a faint rustling sound coming from the trees behind us. "Probably an animal," I said, trying to sound confident, but my voice betrayed me. The rustling grew louder, and then we saw it. A shadow, tall and human-like, moving between the trees. "Who's there?" George shouted, his flashlight darting around. No response. The shadow didn't stop, didn't hesitate. It just kept moving closer. "Let's go," I said, my heart racing. We turned and started walking back toward the car, but the shadow seemed to follow us, weaving through the trees. Then we heard a low, guttural sound, like a growl. "Run!" Cameron yelled, and we took off down the path. The thing, whatever it was right behind us. I didn't dare look back, but I could hear it, heavy footsteps crashing through the underbrush. When we finally reached the car, George fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking. He unlocked the doors, and we all piled in. As soon as the engine roared to life, he floored it. We didn't stop until we were back in the city, parked under a streetlight. None of us said a word for a long time. Finally, Cameron broke the silence. "What the hell was that?" he asked, his voice trembling. None of us had an answer. To this day, I don't know what we encountered in those woods. All I know is that I've never used Randonautica again, and I probably never will. Some things are better left unexplored. Third story. My name is Lily, and I've always loved visiting my grandparents' farm. It's quiet, peaceful, and surrounded by miles of open fields and dense woods. Every summer, my cousins Adam and Zoe would come too, and we'd spend weeks exploring, riding bikes, and telling ghost stories. Last year, during one of those visits, Adam came up with an idea. We'd been sitting on the porch, bored, watching the sun dip low over the fields when he pulled out his phone and said, "Let's try Randonautica." Zoe and I exchanged hesitant glances. We'd heard stories about the app leading people to strange places and creepy discoveries. But Adam was persistent, saying it'd be fun and that there was nothing to be scared of. "We're in the middle of nowhere," he said. "What could possibly happen?" Reluctantly, Zoe and I agreed. We set the intention as something interesting and waited as the app generated coordinates. When the location popped up, Adam grinned. "It's close," he said, pointing to a spot just beyond the woods that bordered the farm. We decided to check it out as the sun was setting. With flashlights and a little nervous excitement, the three of us walked across the field and into the woods. The path was familiar, we'd played there as kids, but something about it felt different that evening. The shadows were longer, the air colder, and the usual sounds of the woods seemed muffled. It didn't take long to reach the spot marked by the app. At first, we didn't see anything unusual. Just trees, fallen leaves, and the faint outline of a clearing up ahead. But as we stepped closer, something caught Zoe's attention. "Look," she whispered, pointing to the ground. Scattered across the clearing were small, melted candles. They were arranged in a rough circle, their wax pooled and hardened in the dirt. In the center of the circle was a dark, wet stain. It didn't take a genius to realize it was blood. "What the hell is this?" Adam muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. I felt my stomach turn as Zoe bent down to get a closer look. "It's fresh," she said, her face pale. Before we could process what we were seeing, a loud snap echoed through the woods. It sounded like a branch breaking, and it was close. Too close. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my heart pounding. Adam nodded, his flashlight darting around the trees. Then we heard it again, footsteps, slow and deliberate, crunching through the leaves. "Someone's here," Zoe whispered, grabbing my arm. We froze, listening as the footsteps grew louder, circling us. The shadows between the trees seemed to shift, and I could feel my chest tighten with fear. "We need to go," I said, my voice shaking. Adam didn't argue. We turned and started back toward the farm, walking quickly at first but breaking into a run when the footsteps followed. I didn't dare look back, but I could hear someone moving behind us. When we finally reached the edge of the field, we stopped, gasping for breath. The footsteps had stopped, but the woods behind us were eerily silent. "What was that?" Zoe asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Adam said, shaking his head. "But we're not going back." That night, none of us slept. We didn't tell our grandparents what we'd seen, and we avoided the woods for the rest of the summer. To this day, I have no idea what we stumbled upon in that clearing. A ritual? A prank? Something worse? I don't use Randonautica anymore, and I haven't set foot in those woods since. Some mysteries are better left unsolved.